What if I told you that a massive global empire was just deliberately erased from history? An entire civilization just wiped from every map and scrubbed from our memory. Today we're diving into one of the internet's most fascinating and sprawling mysteries, the lost empire of Tartaria.
So here's the core idea, the big what if. Imagine an empire so huge, so dominant, that it was on all the maps for centuries. And then, one day, it just wasn't. According to this theory, that's not some fantasy story. It's exactly what happened.
You know, the whole thing really starts with the maps. For over 300 years, we're talking from the 1500s all the way to the 1800s, respected mapmakers from all over Europe, French, Dutch, German, they all drew this enormous territory, again and again.
And we're not talking about some tiny little kingdom here. This was called Grand Tartary, and it was shown stretching from the Caspian Sea clear across to the Pacific Ocean, covering basically all of Siberia and Central Asia. It was just a massive, undeniable presence on the world map.
And that, right there, is the big, burning question that really kicks this whole thing off. How does something that enormous, something that was documented for so long, just, poof, vanish? It's not just off the new maps, it's gone from every single history book. It really is as if a massive chapter of world history was just ripped out.
But according to the theorists, the proof isn't just on some old, dusty maps. They say it's all around us, built in stone and steel. We're talking about these incredible, magnificent buildings that just seem, well, they seem impossibly advanced for the time they were supposedly built.
Let's just take the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. This place, this incredible white city, was absolutely immense. We're talking over 600 acres.
It had over 200 of these really elaborate, grand buildings, a lot of them just colossal in scale.
And here is the part that just doesn't add up for a lot of people. The official story is that this entire city, all of it, was designed and built in just 2 years, 24 months. I mean, think about that. A modern construction company with all of our cranes and computers would struggle with that timeline. So this leaves you with two very, very different stories. The official line? These were all just temporary buildings, kind of like a movie set, made of plaster and wood, and then torn down after the fair. But the Tartarian theory? It suggests these were ancient, solid buildings that were already there. They were just cleaned up for the fair and then deliberately destroyed to hide the evidence of a civilization we weren't supposed to know about. And this is a big point of suspicion for the theorists. We have tons of photos of the completed fairs, right? And we even have pictures of them being demolished. But where are all the photos of them being built? You'd think if you were putting together something so spectacular, you'd want to document every single step. But those photos are strangely missing.
Okay, so if these giant, solid buildings were all over the place, where did they go? Well, the next part of this theory gives a pretty shocking answer. The Tartarian Empire didn't just vanish, it was buried.
This brings us to a really central idea in this whole mystery. It's called the Great Mud Flood. The theory is that sometime in the 1800s, a massive cataclysm happened that buried entire cities all over the world under feet, sometimes stories, of mud and dirt.
And proponents of this idea say the evidence is literally right under our feet. You know those old buildings where the ground floor is now a basement? Or you see windows peeking out right at sidewalk level? They point to things like the Seattle Underground tours or entire building fronts that were dug up in San Francisco after the 1906 earthquake as stone-cold proof.
So again, you've got two competing explanations. Mainstream history says, hey, look, cities get built on top of themselves. Street levels rise slowly over time. But the mud flood theory argues for one single catastrophic event that buried buildings all over the globe all at the same time. It's a question of scale and speed.
All right, so this next part is where the theory really gets wild. It tries to answer two huge questions. Who on earth could have built all this stuff? And how did they power their world? And let me tell you, the answers are extraordinary.
Theorists say you just have to look at the buildings themselves. Why would you build doorways that are 15, even 20 feet high? Why are the staircases and ceilings so massive, like 3 times higher than they need to be? Why does the furniture in so many old photographs look like it was made for people much, much bigger than us?
The conclusion they draw is as simple as it is shocking. These buildings weren't just made to be grand and impressive. They were built to be functional for inhabitants who were, well, significantly taller than we are. They were built for giants. And their technology? Get this. The theory claims that these massive, intricate structures, like cathedrals with their spires and domes, or those sprawling star-shaped forts, they weren't for worship or war. No, they were actually sophisticated power plants, designed to pull free energy right out of the atmosphere using sound and vibration.
So you take all these pieces, the vanished maps, the impossible buildings, the mud flood, the giants, the free energy, and you put them all together. And according to the theory, it all leads to one final, pretty dark conclusion. A deliberate, coordinated worldwide conspiracy to erase an entire chapter of human history.
And theorists call this the Great Reset. Now, this is not the modern term you might hear about in the news. This is a much older, more sinister idea, a supposed plan back in the 19th and 20th centuries to destroy all the evidence of Tartaria, rewrite the history books, and hide their incredible technology from the rest of us.
And when you look at the historical timeline, you start to see a very suspicious cluster of events. Mainstream history tells us these are all just unrelated tragedies. But the theory asks, what if they weren't random at all? What if these disasters were targeted attacks designed to wipe out the last physical proof of Tartaria?
And here's one final, kind of unsettling piece of the puzzle that theorists bring up. Early photography. Why do so many pictures of huge cities from the late 1800s look totally empty, like ghost towns? The official explanation is that the camera exposure times were really long. But the theory poses a different question. What if these cities were empty because they had only recently been repopulated, after something wiped out everyone who lived there before?
So, at the end of the day, what are we supposed to make of all this? Is Tartaria just a modern myth, something that spun out of a simple misunderstanding of what Tartary meant on old maps? Or are we living among the ruins of a forgotten world, walking on streets that cover a history we were never meant to find? The whole theory asks us to just look around and seriously question whether the story we've been told is the whole story.